A glimmering icon in the heart of the city. Towering above the River Elbe, the concert venue Elbphilharmonie has become Hamburg's new cultural attraction. Another key landmark, the historic City Hall, built in the late 19th century. It is Hamburg's seat of government and home to the regional parliament. This city is proud of its long-standing tradition of democracy, independence, liberalism, and of course, trade. The bustling harbour, Europe's #2, is the lifeblood of the city's economy. It is Hamburg's gateway to the world, including to China. In fact, every third container here comes from or goes to China. Relations between the two countries have never been so comprehensive, especially when it comes to trade and economic cooperation. But these are challenging times. Trade conflicts between China and the US pose a threat to economic growth worldwide. And German companies, especially those that produce in both countries, are worried. And then there's the issue of Hong Kong, a stress test for China's relationship with the West. Another point of focus is Huawei. German politicians and citizens alike are wondering, how trustworthy is this Chinese tech giant? China and Germany, two big intertwined trading nations. But are they partners or rivals?
Challenging times, it seems much of what we knew and cherished is shifting. The balance of world powers and alliances, global institutions, things are getting more confrontational. And then there's the sheer speed of technological developments. Hello and welcome to this dialogue about German-European-Chinese cooperation, and welcome to Hamburg, my home city. In Chinese, Hamburg is called Hanbao. It means the Chinese fortress. In 1731, the first Chinese sailing ship with commercial goods reached Hamburg. Today, about 10,000 Chinese live around here. There are about 550 Chinese companies, including COSCO, the Chinese shipping company, who has its European headquarters here in Hamburg. This city prides itself of being Germany's gateway to the world, of being liberal, and a city which thrived on international trade hundreds of years ago when it formed the Hanse together with other European cities. Trade and dialogue are Hamburg landmarks, and so today we are hosted here at the Körber Foundation, an international think tank promoting dialogue. But apart from ships, there are weekly 36 trains from China arriving in Hamburg. I'm not sure if you took one. It takes 2 weeks, Ray. You look a bit tired.
It's much more about the German food than the trains. Actually, Hanbao sounds in Chinese like Chinese stronghold. Thank you very much for defending China and trade with China for 2 centuries. Hello, everyone. We're glad to be back and sharing stage with NDR. We'll discuss how to redefine some of the ideas that will shape the collective future of China, Germany, and the rest of the world. Our consensus should be to embrace free trade based on multilateralism and rules. The gateway of Hamburg connects our 2 economies, not necessarily just today, but actually for 2 centuries. However, despite the fall of the Berlin Wall exactly 30 years ago, this connection faces some real barriers today. Trust building is a process that must be examined through common stakes, through Germany's practical foreign policies, and perhaps through changes in the power dynamic as well. We believe that discussion and debate, rather than unilateral sanctions, will help shed light on the alternative truth. Joining us here on the panel on the Chinese side are Madam Wu Changhua, CEO of a kind of a think tank. What's it called?
Beijing Future Innovation Center.
Fantastic. He's an expert of environmental protection. And Professor Yao Yang, Dean of National School of Development with Peking University. Welcome to the special dialogue with Germany and with the rest of the world.
Thank you.
And on my side are from Hamburg, Professor Amrita Nalika, President of the GIGA, the German Institute for Global and Area Studies, which advises the Foreign Ministry on many topics. Before coming to Hamburg, she was reader in international political economics at University of Cambridge and at Oxford. And next to Amrita is Mikko Huotari, who's got a Finnish name but German background in German. How to understand China, that's his business. He's the deputy director of the Mercator Institute for Chinese Studies, a leading think tank based in Berlin. He's also an expert on China's foreign policy and relations with Europe. And Mikko, coming back to Hamburg and the idea that Hamburg toys with being one end of the new Silk Road, of the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. There were efforts of China to engage in the harbor, in fact, to build a fifth terminal. The last time by Jack Ma, the head of Alibaba, he was blocked off. No decision was made. Is that the general feeling in Germany when it comes to the BRI? Let's be cautious and don't risk anything?
Well, I think we have to differentiate between the perception in the broader business sphere and in politics. I would say that there is, of course, lots of companies and also local municipalities, cities like Hamburg, that have a great deal of interest in the Belt and Road Initiative, in transport networks, in building up logistics networks, etc. But I agree with you, there is a great deal of caution and also hesitance to better understand, so what are we exactly buying into if we support the Belt and Road Initiative, and what is actually in it for us? So who eventually benefits from that? Is it mainly Chinese companies? Is it mainly Chinese state-owned companies? Or is there really a great deal of possibilities for European German companies to participate in that? And I think there are doubts about this, and we have seen this expressed in many forms, including, I think, in Hamburg.
Yao Yang, you are an economist. How do you respond to German concerns about the transparency and intention of what we call the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative? Because we are clearly aware of a rebound in public opinions about what China actually wants to deliver, what we want to achieve.
Well, I think most of the concerns on the political side probably is overstated. BRI is basically an economic project illustrated by China to reach out the rest of the world, particularly the Euro-Asia continent, right? And of course, China is a new development country, and also China can offer really fresh development experience to rest of the world, particularly those southern countries on Belt and Road. I think that's also one of the focus of BRI. I don't think that the common understanding that China wants to kind of dump the excessive capacity to the rest of the world is a correct interpretation of BRI. It's mainly China's intention to contribute to reconstruction of some parts of Euro-Asia and also the development of southern countries on the road.
The BRI covers 60 countries. I read this, 2/3 of the world's population, and China has invested $600 billion. That's a lot. Rita, what is your take on BRI? How do many of these countries who are third or fourth world countries see it? They profit from it, but they might also be indebted?
So I would say that there are probably three sets of concerns. So the first one has to do with debt trap diplomacy. And we've seen a lot of writing coming out on this recently. And one example that is cited is Sri Lanka and the acquisition of the deep sea port. And will all these projects turn out to be debt traps? Probably not. We have to see how the projects evolve, and it's still too early. But there is concern on the grounds that this is in some ways easy money in comparison, for example, to European money or money from the IMF or the World Bank or other forms of investment. That's the first problem. The second concern is about standards, about environmental and labor standards. Now, again, it's very tempting to just bash China on this. China is not forcing countries to take on coal industry, for example. There is a demand for this. But here, what I would say is, clearly there is a demand for development, and Europe is probably not doing as much as it could, and China is stepping in. So China is filling a gap here, and it's making use of an opportunity. And maybe we should be offering better If we think we have better alternatives, then better alternatives. And third, there are security-related concerns, because a lot of infrastructure development or technology development can have dual use. So if you get a deep-sea port, for example, yes, you can use it for trade, but you can also use it for military purposes. So I would say those are three sets of concerns. It's still early days, but these concerns are serious.
So, Changhua, among the multiple challenges concerning BRI, an expert of environmental protection, what do you think of their concerns on what influence the BRI would exert on all of the countries and parties involved in the game?
Sure. I think it definitely is a reasonable concern. And if you look at the early stage, even before the formalizing of BRI, where there's a Belt and Road Initiative started sort of around 2014. Between 2014 and 2017, I call that a sort of pre-BRI sort of a process. As you mentioned, actually, lots of capital invested in high carbon-intensive coal-fired power plants. There were complaints about not only security, but also on the air pollution, on damage to the ecosystem, stuff like that. But I think it's a process in a way. China is learning through that process, and 10 Chinese NGOs petitioned the Chinese government around 2017, basically say, look, the government has changed the tactics since 2017. So in the last 2 years, I definitely witnessed a step forward in terms of really putting programs together, code of conduct together, guidelines together, and Chinese companies in particular now required to take on their responsibility when they go overseas. So on that particular point, I said there are issues, as you mentioned, actually. Coal-fired power plants, it's not like China wants to impose on other countries. There is access to energy issues there. There is a demand. But I think that's exactly where EU, China can work more closely together in order to address that challenge.
Changhua, before I came here, I checked the wires on that other big topic. Is there a trade deal between the United States and China? Everybody's concerned about it, but I must say, no deal imminent. To quote President Trump, it could happen any time. So whilst we're sitting here, maybe it's happening, we don't know. If they agree, is this going to save global trade? What do you think? What's your take?
This is a really unfortunate situation. The world has to somehow be impacted following it around actually these two biggest economies playing this sort of trick or game together. For now, I don't think I see the end of it yet, but I think the encouraging signs that bilaterally, two countries have agreed that phase one, that's really to make some sort of a deals for now, but this is not final solution yet. Maybe this is sort of another indication, say, 2020 U.S. presidential election is around the corner. Somehow we need to move forward for the U.S. election for Trump. On the China side, we've been very frustrated as well. I think.
Well, excuse me, ceasefire is better than nothing before we reach a peace treaty. But Mikko, let's look at what happens in Europe. The Chinese are very much concerned as to why the bilateral trade plummeted by 84% in the first half of the year compared with the same period of 2018. Is that because of the approval by European politicians of what you call the framework of screening for foreign direct investment? How worrying are these figures? I mean, 84% nosedive. Is that the end of the world?
Not at all. And I think the main reason for that is actually the slowdown of the Chinese economy. So what you mentioned, the new establishment of new rules in Europe that look at screening foreign direct investment have nothing to do with the trade plummeting. It's about what's happening in China, the difficulties of the Chinese economy, the slowing down of demand over there, and I think that really drives the story that you've just told us. Yeah.
Well, it's hitting everybody. German companies in China, I just read the poll of the Chamber of Commerce in Beijing. Their outlook on the last quarter and on the results of this year is maybe reaching 27% of what they got, so that's quite a bad figure. But Rita, is this the new world game we're looking at? Two big powers dealing it out. Then who broke the WTO, the World Trade Organization?
That's a great question. And of course, it's very fashionable. The fashionable explanation is, let's bash Trump. It's true, Trump has definitely not helped in any shape or form in terms of preserving the WTO. But it's very important to remember that, for example, right now the dispute settlement body of the WTO is paralyzed. Right? And from December onwards, it will not be able, the appellate body will not be able to do anything because there will be only one judge left. Why is this happening? Because Trump has been blocking the appointment or the reappointment of appellate body judges. But Trump is not the first person to be doing this. It happened in 2011, in 2013, 14, and 16 under Obama. So the problems go further back, and it's not, and yes, then Trump comes along and says trade wars are good and easy to win. So yes, the US has not helped in saving the system, but neither has China. China has also been violating several WTO rules. For example, a violation of trade-related intellectual property rights. For example, forced technology transfers. So there have been problems coming from both sides.
Excuse me, Professor Yao Yang, do you agree that we have violated the...
May I just continue with one more point about this system?
Over to you.
And the point is simply that the WTO has been blocked for a very long time. It has been in a deadlock. So the US is the problem, China is a problem, and there have been many institutional problems of the WTO. So even if, going back to your prior question, even if the US and China come up with a deal, that's not going to solve anything, because the problems of the system go further back.
Okay. Well, what about the alleged coercive technological transfer by China?
Well, I think 10 years ago, WTO actually had a report on China's fulfillment of China's commitment to WTO. And the WTO report said that China fulfilled 90% of China's commitment. I don't think the WTO actually had a rule for forced technological transfer. That was actually raised by the United States. I don't think that's the issue. And also, the stallment of WTO was not related to China's so-called violation of WTO rule. It's basically the United States that say, hey, I don't want to play the game, right? So let's stop this. But I want to come back to this China-U.S. bilateral talk. I'm actually not that pessimistic about the future of WTO. Look, WTO has served us for 25 years, more than 25 years now, right? And China definitely has benefited a lot from that. But definitely there is also a China shock. China is so huge. And the United States has received that shock. And to me, I believe United States needs time to readjust its economy and also its relation with the rest of the world. So recently, 37 economists, legal scholars from China, United States, and other countries signed a joint statement, and I'm one of them. And we call for both countries to just find a middle ground, not just a convergence between the two countries, not decoupling, right? So I think after the two countries settled some of the issues, we can come back to WTO.
Great. May
I come back to that? Because I agree partly with you. I don't agree with the first part about has China been in violation, because the report that you cited is 10 years ago, and there have been a great many violations that the EU has also been now pointing to and so forth. But your second point is actually a very important one, because what the system needs is reform. And there, ideally, we should have China on board and the US on board, but also many other powers on board, which have all been very unhappy with the way the system has been going, pre-trade wars being good and easy to win, according to Trump.
Well, Trump probably has got not so much time left as compared to President Xi, because Trump needs to be re-elected. Your president doesn't have to be re-elected. Is that a fair assumption? He needs a good stock exchange, and if the trade war goes on, stock exchange will be down, and maybe the chances of re-election very bad for President Trump. So
I don't want to talk about that. Andrea, it's a good question. I don't want to talk about the differences between consultative democracy and the electoral democracy. Each has its own advantages and vulnerabilities. Let me go back to the the particular issue that we Chinese are so concerned with, the decline, sharp decline in the bilateral trade between the European Union and China.
Investment.
Investment, yes,
Investment, yes, indeed. Sorry about this. President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, said that we are not naive free traders. Is the EU turning more conservative, and is he targeting China?
Well, I think you have to keep things in perspective. China is one of the most closed economies, if you take certain indicators by the OECD, and Europe is one of the most open marketplaces in the world. So indeed, there have been some concerns about some types of Chinese investment, and the European Union and some member states are trying to adjust to that reality, because there has been a massive spike of Chinese investment in Europe, and certain concerns related to that. Now, is Europe turning more protectionist and more closed compared to China? Certainly not. There's much more homework to be done in the Chinese, on the Chinese side. And I think you should be very optimistic about the future of European openness, and no need to worry about that.
No need to worry, because, as I say, single day this week, Alibaba has sold goods for more than $38 billion. That's more than 3/4 than Amazon in the United States sells as a whole. So there's a good domestic trade in China as well.
Yes, indeed, online payment is thriving on the fact that perhaps, allegedly, the Chinese show less interest or show less awareness about the protection of their privacy. That's a popular assumption, that middle class in Europe and other Western countries are so desperately concerned about the protection of their privacy. They don't want to share the dividends of big data or the hidden camera with face recognition, and therefore they refuse to use online payment. But does that mean China will have the frog leap and a corner overtaking?
Yes.
Corner overtaking.
Yes, I think
the new round of industrialization.
Yes, or the fourth industrial revolution. I think, like it or not, China is already a part of the leadership. EU definitely is leading forward as well. But I want to go back to the question you asked about the plummet of Chinese outbound FDI to EU. I agree with Mikkel to a certain extent, to a large extent. I think it's mostly from China. Chinese government has been trying to deleverage and really reduce, manage the, foreign currency exchange, the flow, whatever. So yes, mostly that's sort of decided by Chinese policy and regulation. But on the other side, I think, the framework screening FDI, there is a clear intention targeting China as well.
We've looked in detail into this, and I can tell you there's hardly any impact so far of this. So the main
there is a process,
potentially,
because that you're slowing the process. Of course, even now, even though it became effective, member states actually still have until next year, I think now October or whatever, to get everything together. But that sends a very, very strong signal, right? Of course, on one side, I do understand within the member states of the EU, you do need, coordination, consultation, notification scheme, whatever. But in it, it's specifically mentioning some sort of specific industrial sectors that you are basically saying, those are the sensitive sectors, and you're going to, I'd say, block whatever. You're going to pay particular attention to that. And those happens to be some of the major technology areas that China definitely moving forward very, very fast, and definitely, willingly seeking partnership and collaboration with the EU market there as well. So I just want to make sure. So yes, on one side, I definitely agree with you. Chinese government policy is playing a big role, because we do need to manage the financial risk. On the other side, this framework is coming on board, sending very, very clear signal to the industries, to the member state countries. When you look at the Chinese, investment, somehow.
Moving from that topic to another one that we mentioned at the beginning is Huawei, which is a big case, and it might be a political case to be decided in Europe. Countries have said no, other countries have said, well, good for the hardware, like Great Britain, and there's the threat from the United States towards Germany. If you go with Huawei, we will not deliver any security information further on. So how do you see an outcome of that debate in Germany? What's going to be the result, Mikko?
Oh, by the way, before we have the decent reply from this gentleman, I visited Italy and Greece many times, and I saw everywhere the commercials of Huawei in the streets everywhere. So I was deeply impressed about the influence, and we thank President Trump for promoting the brand of Huawei.
Well, indeed, the company has been very effective in promoting its brand in Europe. I agree with that. And I can't predict the outcome because it's a highly politicized process, and I think that's right, because it's a very important decision that is going to be taken. So it is good that politicians take care of that decision, and that parliamentarians, as it's happening these days, look at this issue very carefully, because it's about the future of 5G, and 5G means much more than that. It means actually connectivity in many different aspects of our daily life. So I think it's very important that we look carefully at it, and we look at it from a data protection perspective, from a security perspective, and from an industrial policy perspective. And from all of these perspectives, you might come to different outcomes and judgments. What I can say is that we're currently in a process where European standards and European joint assessments are being produced on this. And if you use these criteria, there are good reasons to be quite skeptical about the question to what extent Huawei as a company, which might be having the best intentions, is embedded in a system and a state which might not have. And that question is pretty critical for us to decide to what extent do we actually trust parts of the Chinese government in implementing these policies that they do.
Miko, my follow-up question about the Huawei, Changhua and Yang is, it seems Huawei boasts of the first-class lawyers from the United States. As China is an important part of the global supply chain, Huawei is widely viewed as an international player.
It's a global company.
It's a global company. It's one of the international multinationals, very influential and increasingly so. We are very confident. What do you make of, say, the dilemma presented by the United States to the ecosystem about Huawei? Huawei is an important part of the ecosystem, right?
Yeah. One thing I want to add here, I think if we all agree, we use the term the fourth industrial revolution, particularly on the digitalization side, AI, robots, right? Those are the emerging technologies coming on board. On one side, it's very exciting to see the progress, right? The R&D, the innovation coming on board. On the other side, there is a tremendous uncertainty. We don't know yet. This is about the security. We could talk about cybersecurity and privacy among all the others there. I remember there was a conversation last year. I was attending a small session with some EU company, I think EU commerce actually in Beijing. There was a report complaining about, say, the unfair treatment of some European companies actually in one particular sector called the smart cities, right? I think that, so when we talk about Huawei here, that sort of reminds me of the conversation in China as well. I think the concerns actually, particularly the security, privacy, whatever, is shared, right?
Do you think this is mainly about trust? I spoke to Huawei CEO recently on LinkedIn. He said, well, if the government asks us to hand over data, we just won't. And I said, well, it would be more convincing if there was an independent judiciary that you could apply to, etc. So is this a matter of trust, or how do you feel about it? Yeah.
Well, I feel really unfortunate that the Huawei question is so politicized. It never happened before, right? I talked with Ren Zhengfei, the chairman of Huawei. He always emphasized Huawei is an international company, period. It's not a Chinese company. You look at its composition of employees, particularly on the research side. Huawei invested heavily in European universities, right? And in my humble opinion, to judge whether a company is a global and a great company, there's only one criterion, that is whether that company invests into something that's not currently useful to that company. And Huawei definitely is one of that.
Investing in the future.
Right, investing in the future. So I feel really unfortunate to see Huawei has been politicized. I want to answer Miko's question or comment on that. Right? 5G standards has nothing to do with any government, including Chinese government, right? It's a set of standards that's negotiated among those big players, those companies, right? So I don't know how this is kind of related to Chinese government, okay? And also
the same way? Amrita?
No, I don't actually, because I see something that Miko just started touching on is this link between the state and the market, right? So a lot of our discussions in the past used to be, you get economic interdependence and great, we get socialization, we get peace. And what we're seeing now is a recognition, not only, I think, from all sides. So again, there's no reason to pick on any one country on this. It's the point you made about the fourth industrial revolution and the fact that a lot of these technologies will turn out to be dual-use technologies, whether it's AI, sort of robots, or weaponization. So those two...
Then let me stop there. If by that standard, you should be skeptical to any technology, not just a Huawei, right? That's not a concrete argument. That's not a concrete argument.
Centuries ago, we started to spy on each other. Is that an old industry, right?
Even the Americans spied on us. They listened on to Chancellor Merkel's tone. So
right.
Why should we trust China if we can even treat it like this by the Americans?
No, but I think that the question that you ask is a good one here, right? And and what we are seeing right now is the fact that you're getting these really intense networks. Right? You're getting hubs of networks, and those two hubs right now, this is the work of some of my colleagues in the US. They're talking about weaponized interdependence. And you're getting these two hubs, one based in the US, one based in China. And before, the idea was you just have economic networks, and they will all create democracies and equalities, and they don't.
With regard to
state
Huawei,
power sitting on them.
With regard to Huawei, let me ask you a very tough question as to the prospects of high technology, particularly the fifth generation. Now, I don't think that, first of all, there is a single voice or a monolithic picture about European attitudes towards Huawei, very much like how the United Kingdom was the first to join the AIIB, and likewise Italy was the first to break the silence of the European Union to sign up to the BRI memorandum. Now, the UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres said in his address to the general debate of the 74th UN General Assembly, "I fear the possibility of a great fracture, the world splitting in two, with the two largest economies on Earth creating two separate and competing worlds." The UN chief also called on all 193 UN members to maintain a universal system, a universal economy with universal respect for international law. Miko and Changhua, what do you think of the prospects of having a parallel market concerning 5G? And even more seriously, we are likely to return to the Cold War.
What do you mean parallel?
Parallel means we have two separate systems of technology.
I think the last part of your question is one that leads us further. Are we watching a new Cold War? Is the U.S.-China relationship a new Cold War?
There's an iron curtain descending on Europe, continental Europe.
The short answer is highly, highly likely. Let me put it that way. If countries like China, EU, we just say, okay, whatever, we just go with the flow. Those large players out there, whatever. I think it's highly likely, particularly around the high technology development.
Let's keep that short. Do you think, Yang, it's highly likely? And then maybe the two of you?
I don't think so. I don't think so. That, companies are rational. As I said, 5G standards were set by companies, not by the states. Okay, I don't think any company wants to have two separate systems. That's going to raise the cost.
Miko?
I think we already live in a world of partial decoupling. It is happening. If you look at the figures of investment by, for instance, Chinese investment in the US is basically zero these days. And these interlinkages in the development of technologies, I mean, they continue to exist, but they are being questioned every day. And I think we are seeing this world already playing out, and it will intensify. I think that's, I agree with you, it's pretty likely.
The Cold War of the 21st century, US-China?
Likely, because decoupling is already happening, but there is a third way, and the third way is possibly Europe working alongside with other countries with which it shares some values.
When you talk about values, let's come to Hong Kong. We're into the 5th month of protests and demonstrations in Hong Kong. Emotions are running quite high. We see violence on both sides. Young Chinese media accuse the West of pushing Hong Kong to the abyss by supporting the protesters, especially from the United States. Why is China using the West as a scapegoat for obvious Hong Kong leadership difficulties?
I don't think China is using the West as a scapegoat, right? You know, the issue, Hong Kong belongs to China, but we also maintain this one country, two system, right? So Hong Kong has a democracy or have democracy, right? So that's a right for students to go on the street.
Oh, by the way, Yang, did Hong Kong have any democracy before the handover of the sovereignty in 1997?
No, but it's going toward the democracy. But always, you live in a democracy, you know democracy always comes with responsibility. Without the responsibility, there's no democracy. It's just a chaos. And Hong Kong now is in chaos. It's not good for Hong Kong people, not good for China, not good for the whole world.
We could have destructive chaos and constructive chaos. The issue is violence, vandalism.
Right.
When someone will set a fire with a petroleum, when the cop was cut on the neck. I mean, how do you define true democracy?
I have seen pictures of violence on both sides. Let's not get into details, because I've also seen policemen running over protesters with a bike.
That will exist in details. We have to, as journalists, we have to examine details. Sorry for this. Sorry, I don't agree with you.
The trouble is that how to find a way out, and then how to find the stakeholders that are involved here. They have to make decisions that affect other things like the Taiwan elections that are closed, US-China trade frictions, and the possible Hong Kong Act in the Congress at the US. So what is the way out?
I think back to Yang Rui's question, what's happening now in Hong Kong is really getting out of control, right? It's no longer sort of democracy, protest, whatever. Rather, it's already in violation of law, because it's vandalizing the properties, damaging properties, hurting people. I think, you know, in a sort of a legal or, you know, democratic sort of system there. So that sort of acts need to be held accountable, including everyone, right? That's one thing. Second thing, actually, back to Andrew's question, the way out. Ideally, right, so in a democratic sort of setting, people have different opinions. We need to come together around the table, sit down, you know, the key leaders, whatever. Let's really put things on the table, have a candid conversation, discussion. Then hopefully through that process, we'll be able to draw some conclusions or decisions there. But at this moment, we don't know that who are the leaders of, at least I don't really have a clear understanding of who are the leaders of the students there. And no one seems to be willing to come to the table to have a conversation. That's why it's a sort of really chaotic, out of control
About the prospects of Hong Kong, Miko and Amrita, what do you think of the growing importance of the Grand Bay Area, and Hong Kong could be part of the further economic integration with the Grand Bay Area that connects Hong Kong, Macau with the 9 cities in Guangdong? Given the sharp decline in the economic growth of Hong Kong due to the turbulence there, what do you think of any solution to Hong Kong as a vibrant financial hub? Is it likely to be replaced by Tokyo or Singapore? What do you think of the future of this territory?
Well, I can say something, but this is very much Miko's area, so let me turn
to
Miko.
Well, I would like to stick for a moment with the issue of accountability, indeed. You mentioned it, and I find it very important. And indeed, police accountability and the accountability of the leadership in Hong Kong and in Beijing is absolutely critical here. This is an extremely sad, extremely dangerous, and also telling situation. I mean, we are facing, indeed, a focal point here in terms of the systemic conflict that we see playing out. And to my reading of the situation, what we see is that the leadership in Beijing and in Hong Kong is not able to understand the wishes and the feelings of the population on the ground in a way that makes it possible to find a way out of the situation. I agree with you that chaos and violence has escalated, and on both sides. I agree with that fact. But I think the responsibility for this, to a large degree, is really on the side of the leadership. And we have to make sure that also in the West we are clear about this fact and about the responsibility of the leadership in terms of not also violating international agreements that Hong Kong, China and other players have signed. So going back to your question, the level of integration is actually something that, you know, frightens parts of the Hong Kong population. I understand your question is mainly related to the question to what extent there might be an alternative. I don't think so in the near time, and I think the Chinese leadership knows this very well. But the speed and the way how Hong Kong is being pulled into the mainland in terms of patriotic education, etc., this is what really frightens the people on the ground, and I think we have to take it very
Are you suggesting
seriously.
quietly, the more China is integrated with the rest of the world, the more the West is frightened? The way Hong Kong is integrated into the Grand Bay Area, and Hong Kong people would feel frightened. I mean, this
I'm
sounds
not
ridiculous.
what I'm saying.
This is hysterics and quite beyond common sense. What's the sense of being hysteric about being integrated economically into a Grand Bay Area? Bay Area as a concept is so popular. China is no exception. So
from China perspective, I think I interpret that very constructive. I see more positive future. Because any city or region develop, it's not to say I develop on my own, whatever, right? And I think this greater regional development strategy is being recognized as a successful model more and more so around the world and also in China. So the Grand Bay Area strategy from, decided by the government, I definitely see that as a positive, because potentially that's going to create more opportunities for young people to have a job, to have a future, and to have better education. So I wouldn't say that's going to totally solve short-term, immediately the Hong Kong situation, but really mid-term, longer-term, there is a huge prospect there.
Yao Yang, I think he's been very quiet.
I might return him because he
comes across as a nice boy. He's too nice. He's too quiet. He could be outspoken.
The point about the relations with the West, which is our focus. So what is going to happen? Is this a stress test for the relations with the West? Whatever happens in Hong Kong, is it going to worsen the situation? We spoke earlier of
Miko has voiced his grave concern about the fears of Hong Kong people. Let me invite Yao Yang to respond to his concerns. I think his concerns represent the fears of Europeans.
We will have Amrita, and then
let's give him a chance.
We have both of them.
Okay? Let's give him a chance.
I actually want to come back to your question first. You posed a question as a stress test for China. I don't think so. I think the Hong Kong protesters and the controllers behind, their purpose is to make the Chinese authorities angry. I think in this case, the Chinese authorities have done a wonderful job. They have not been made angry. So that's good, right? So we have, as I said, one country, two systems. Hong Kong people are on their own to decide their own fate. And they have the right, they have the mandate to negotiate a settlement.
Okay, the view from China, Amrita?
You don't want me to
You share that?
No, not at all. I really liked the way you framed, you called it a stress test, and I would agree. And where it becomes, again, very interesting is that coming together of the economic and the political. Because a lot of the times, it's companies in the West which have said, no, don't say anything bad, don't do anything to annoy China. But now, the economic policies of many of China's companies are being questioned. So in the West, too, I am concerned that if the Hong Kong situation is not managed better, that will be a stress test for European-Chinese relations.
Okay, we are close, nearing the end of our program. We've had both of them have had their say. What about the audience now? Shall we ask the audience about questions that you might pose to our experts from China or from Germany? Any questions in the audience regarding our topic?
Time to take questions from the audience.
Yes.
All right. Good evening. My question will go to the German expert. Since I'm a Chinese-German-English interpreter, in my daily work, I often encounter we supposedly speak the same language, like English tonight, but actually our understanding of words, of concepts are fundamentally different. Have you encountered such a phenomenon? And if yes, what would be, the concepts that come up to your mind when you think about different understanding, but under the same words? Thank you.
It's a great question.
Is your choice?
You want to go?
Mm-hmm. You go first.
Okay, well, that's a very simple one. I mean, we can start with something that our moderator said earlier, the concept of democracy. And you used it to describe China, which is something that we would probably not do. And so I think it's obvious that we use terms very differently and that we associate very different features with that. Yes.
Okay. And Ray, you've got
a question from this German friend.
I worked in China for 4 years until 2003.
In Beijing or Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen?
But I was responsible for all China. And I was very happy to see how this country was opening, getting self-confident. You got international press all over the different hotels and different shops. But I was a little bit disappointed this year when I came to China again. I saw that you have many, many checks and controls. If you go to the great place in the middle of Beijing, you have controlled checks like at the airport. You have a lot of cameras everywhere. And I felt, did this country lose its self-confidence that they have to check their people in the trains? That is announced, if you don't obey to all the different rules, you may not be allowed to buy a ticket for the next couple of months. So what's happening with China? Why is the system not more confident to say, okay, our people agree with us, we don't have to control them so much?
Okay, Changhua, how do you respond to the alleged growing uncertainty in some of the major cities in China with the use of digital technology, cameras
and facial recognition?
Right.
So different ways of interpreting. I don't think there's a simple answer to that. I think there are quite a few number of considerations there. On one side, from technology application perspective, this is a part of the strategy. The government had decided to really open up more applications for the fourth industrial revolution technology development. I think that's also today, if you look at a certain technology areas, China is already leading. Why? Because we're literally deploying them, try them out, and then through that process, you learn, you develop further. Second element there, I remember I was talking to a leading professor from Beijing. He's in charge of, the whole security system of the city. And one conversation, I said, "Is it safe?" I was asked, "Is it safe to live in Beijing?" He said, "You are very safe." I said, "Why?" He said, currently Beijing pretty much you have no dead street corner, whatever, right? Because of the surveillance camera, all the sort of safety, security systems there, so you feel safe. Technologies always are double-sided edge. On one side, it definitely, good for good intention, but there's also the other side, right? And I live in China. I travel a lot. Do I feel comfortable going through, subway stations? Everywhere you have to be checked or whatever. Probably feel like, why? It's just too much. But on the other side, actually, if you look at the bigger context, we know terrorists, security, whatever. So there are good reasons why the government is moving forward with that, right? We want to make sure people are safe, and the preventive measures are deployed. As I said, like how you feel, personal feeling, I personally feel that as well. I feel like I don't feel comfortable, always being checked, stuff like that. But as I said, that's how we feel, but somehow the government has its own intention or design, thinking of
that
why.
might be a big difference between a European cultural attitude and a Chinese.
That's a matter of culture. I understood, since the September 11th terrorist attacks, the Homeland Security Department was established in the United States, hence the approach of eavesdropping. And a survey was done among American individuals as to whether they feel comfortable about the eavesdropping, and many of them started to say, yes, we love the country, we love security over the issue of privacy. So that might kind of respond to your concerns as to the double-edged sword of digital use of the use of digital technology. What's your question for the questions?
The issue of privacy is one that is hotly debated in Germany all the time, and it's not about surveillance only, it's about service as well, the service industry, etc. So if you want to move into the service industry, you've got to give away your data, etc. But surveillance is a topic that we are not as far as China.
Any more questions?
More questions over here? Okay, so
the second line,
yes, please.
The German friend. Your name, please?
My name is Helmut.
No, we have privacy data here, so you don't have to just come with your question.
That's the excessive European hysteria.
My name is Helmut Seifried.
There you are.
And I have a question again to Huawei. We talked a lot about the role of Huawei in the IT industry. And what would be the plan B for the European or the German partners if they would not accept Huawei in Germany or in Europe.
Okay, so I think that goes to either Miko or Amrita.
Sure. Do you want to go and I add?
Whatever you prefer.
Okay, I'll say.
Well, he's asking about the alternatives.
Yes.
Who knows about the alternatives? I think that's the one.
That's pretty simple.
Plan
I mean,
B
there are
or
European
alternative
alternatives.
choose. Plan B or alternative
Okay,
choose.
Amrita.
I believe that's in essence
With the help
his
of
question.
Miko.
Yeah, there are European alternatives, for example, and Peter Altmaier has been talking about developing these more, but we are late in the process, and we need to buck up, we need to hurry up, for which we also need some state support. This is harder to do within the European Union. So you have alternatives like Ericsson and so forth, but they need the support of the state as well.
I wouldn't fully agree. I think if you look at countries in our neighborhood, Norway, for instance, they have opted for other solutions, including Ericsson and Nokia, and it's possible also in Europe, and Ericsson is willing to deploy 5G very quickly. So I don't think this is really a question about us losing out dramatically and in terms of speed and also cost of deployment. There are alternatives, and there are European suppliers to do that.
But can I add to that? I'm a columnist. I really hate this, right? You know, we believe that.
This was about the plan B.
No. This is about
This is
the
a
plan B. This is about a plan B.
Okay.
Why do you need a plan B, right? You should allow all the companies to compete on the same platform. You also said, Rita said, you also need the state. So in that case, China has been using technologies created by the United States, by Europe, for centuries. So if we were also concerned, like Europeans are concerned today, we should be scared to death, right? We shouldn't use any technologies created by the United States, right? That's nonsense.
But Professor, you are in China. China has digitally decoupled for a long time. Right? I mean,
no. We have been using American technology for
companies are not allowed to operate on the
for
Chinese
decades.
market, so.
Right? We have been using their technologies, right?
It's true.
Well, our computers. Think about our computers.
So Google
Even
is
internet,
not able to operate.
it's created by Americans.
Right. So
Yeah.
I just don't understand why you are so scared. I tell you, Huawei is a global company. Period. Okay.
Okay, that was an interesting debate, but we still have time for one more
Yeah,
question.
a question from the Chinese.
From the gentleman over here.
Could somebody give me some facts-based report about the wrongdoing of Huawei?
Okay.
My understanding, Andrew, is that basically what he means in the question is how to protect the digital ecosystem for which Huawei is an important part the world over. Just don't focus on Huawei itself. Huawei is a part of the digital ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
Well, I take that as an answer. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Because there was no backdoor until now, nobody detected a backdoor, but that doesn't mean there won't be one in the future. So that's the whole point.
No, that's not right. That's not. You cannot suspect the future.
It's about national security interest. That is a good that one of the most precious.
You can bark on the wrong.
Andreas, I thought you were one of the panelists and not a moderator.
Yeah. I do have a comment there.
Okay.
I think today the conversation, we're talking to each other, right? We're trying to share with each other the opinions, perspectives, understanding, strategy, whatever. And the purpose actually is really trying to build up some common grounds, right? But as we are reflecting here, on each side, there are issues much more fundamental about the future. Just we cannot possibly find a common ground. That's a sort of a disappointment, actually. And through the conversation, I feel like, because the evidence, right? You cannot say, how I feel, whatever.
Yeah, where is the evidence?
Where's the evidence, right? And, on one side, we're talking about a global sustainable development goals. We share everything, whatever. But really fundamentally coming to reality, actually, on each side, somehow there are issues, gaps. We just cannot possibly to build a common ground. So I question, I doubt this sort of a common, future. We're going to partnership. We're going to work together. So rather, probably China will be more and more regarded as a rivalry rather than a partner.
That's why we sit
former
down,
First Lady
exchange views face to face, even if we differ. I want to thank everybody in the audience, our panelists. Before I hand over to Ray for some final words, and our host, Körber Foundation, for setting us up here in Hamburg. I say Zaijian, Ray.
It's hard to say 再见 or goodbye to the kind people here in Hamburg. After going through centuries of West-centric discourse, I believe emerging markets, developing countries, start to deliver their strong voice about how to improve things like WTO and other things concerning world order. Does it mean China wants to replace? Does it mean China wants to replace the United States? No. This is part of the conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
For this wonderful
and thank you to the audience. That was Dialogue with the World with CGTN and NDR.
Thank you very much.
We're not sure it's on tape.
I need to show my friends.